Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Maternal and Infant Health Canada's educational seminar series. For those of you who don't already know us, although I know those on here, I've seen the welcome faces already in previous lectures, but Maternal and Infant Health Canada is comprised of doctors, researchers, and traditional medicine practitioners from Canada, India, and around the world, with a shared goal of improving maternal and infant well-being and reducing preventable maternal and infant mortality around the world. Our focus is research, training, and education. If you'd like to learn more about our work and join in, please follow us on our Facebook page. I will add it in our chat box right now. We also have recorded webinars that you can find. I'll put that up, and Instagram. We have all sorts of wonderful things. And then I'll actually add in our chat box the email if you'd like to contact us, if you'd like to be a speaker at any point and share some research or anything you've been doing with the group. Today's webinar is on periods and prosperity, maternal health, menstrual cycles, and achieving abundance. Our presenter today, Dr. Kaur, hopefully I've said that right. She is the CEO of I'm With Periods and DigiProf at UBC and Dalhousie University. Her days primarily consist of research, writing, and teaching. She is now physically based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, on Mi'kmaq territories, and after spending many years living in Vancouver. Her ancestors and family are from the Punjab region of India, Pakistan. Now, we may have our head, Dr. Farah Shroff, also join us shortly. She's the founder, PhD, and the founder of Maternal and Infant Health Canada, and currently is on a Takemi Fellowship at Harvard University. I, as usual, am your moderator, Dr. Emily Solomons. I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, specializing in reproductive medicine and health equity. As with all of our public webinars, I have to add the following disclaimer. This course and handouts may contain general information about medical conditions and treatments. The information is not advice and should not be treated as such. Throughout our lecture, which will be probably 45 minutes, followed by a question period. If you have questions throughout the lecture, you are welcome to put them in the chat box. And what I'll do is I'll capture them. And then at the end of the lecture, we can have a fairly relaxed discussion. We really like to make these interactive because we want to hear your thoughts and get your input as well. So without further ado, I will pass it on. Welcome.
Great. Thanks so much.
It's wonderful to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and welcome everyone to this space. Thank you for that warm welcome. So what I'll do first is just introduce a little bit more about myself, my background, my research program, how I got into this work. And then we're going to cover 3 topics for today. So the first one is going to be the definition of decolonization as it relates to menstrual health and periods, because this notion of decolonization is going to lead us to what it means to manifest abundance using cycles, what it means for maternal health, and how those all tie together. So we'll cover decolonization, and then I'm going to go over the 4 seasons of menstrual cycles approach, which I'm sure you all are super familiar with the various fluctuations that happen over the menstrual cycle, but we'll cover them from a mental health and emotional health perspective, especially since leading up to conception, there's a lot to consider with supporting clients in terms of their fertility, and then during pregnancy itself, obviously there are a lot of changes, and then very importantly, after pregnancy, being able to support people to get back into a regular cycle, not just from a physical standpoint, but that's where we, see a lot of cases of postpartum depression. Having a newborn is obviously very taxing, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, as well as physically. So having this framework sort of in our back pocket, being able to share it with clients can help them, get through that very intense period of life. And then finally, the third piece, I'm going to be talking about how do we manifest abundance, which might seem like it's a little bit out there for this type of talk, but I feel that it's important given the role that mothers play in our society and in our world. Often moms are the ones, as you all probably know, do a lot for everyone around them, maybe not always taking time for themselves. And as caregivers, I want moms to be like wealthy, millionaires, like living their best life so that they can show up healthy and well for their families and for themselves. So we'll cover those three topics, and then I'll close off and we'll have time for discussion. In the final topic, I will do a short demo of a meditation that takes about 90 seconds that we can learn. And I'll go into why that's important for menstrual cycles, maternal health when we get there. So let's jump into it. So again, hi y'all, sat sri akal, mera naam Takdir Kaur Pandal hai. My name is Tak Kaur Pandal, and I am based here on MIHCAN Treaty Territories, also known as Halifax, Nova Scotia, on the far east coast of Canada, at the Atlantic Ocean, the coastal region of the Atlantic Ocean. And I was born and raised on the West Coast, just outside Vancouver. I am just finishing up my PhD from UBC, from the Social Justice Institute there, where I directed my research program funded by CIHR on how do we incorporate theories from social justice like decolonization, like intersectionality or Black feminist thought into our institutions, particularly in the health professions. So in my research program, I was able to interview faculty members in the health professions across Canada and start to get a sense of where we can insert and make space for these practices that are going to help us evolve as practitioners, as mentors for the next generation of health professionals, as well as just as a species, because I feel like we need these perspectives in order to continue to thrive and survive. And during that time, in 2017, I started to see a massive drop-off in my mental health, and I decided to come off the birth control pill. And I found that coming off the pill, I just remember that first week walking around being like, oh my God, I'm so chill, y'all. I'm so chill. I was shocked by the fact that nobody had taught me the importance of ovulation, taught me the impact that it can have on our hormonal health. And, for folks who do see biological children in their future, the impact that it has on people's ability to support their fertility. So 2017 came off the pill, basically had an awakening into, menstrual cycles, the full cycle, as well as women's health in general, and started directing my research towards that then. I started off with an Instagram page called I'm With Periods that I still run, and just sharing that knowledge out to people, getting it out there. And then in 2020, we launched a think tank called the Mawari Research Institute. Mawari is the Punjabi word for menstruation or menstrual cycles, as well as in Urdu and some additional South Asian languages. And we started applying this 4 seasons framework to our consulting with various organizations, from academic institutions to AI companies to private firms. And yeah, we've just been on that trajectory ever since. I'm really interested in decolonization, which I'll get into, and applying that theory to menstrual cycles. So thanks so much for listening to my introduction. I'm a huge nerd about all of this, as you can tell, so I look forward to receiving some of your questions and connecting with you all on a professional basis as well. So with that, let's get into our first topic for today, which is decolonization. And thanks, Elena, for that lovely note and words of encouragement. So our first topic is decolonization. And I share this definition from two scholars, Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang. Eve is based in Toronto at University of Toronto, and Wayne is in California at University of California in the Ethnic Studies Department. And in 2012, they published an open access paper that's called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, to address the fact that this term, which maybe you all have heard, maybe you haven't, is often sort of circulated just generally in relation to social justice, but they wanted to nail it down and get really specific about what it means so that when we use it in our practice, we're using these like original definitions. So the definition of decolonization is the rematriation of Indigenous land and life. So the giving back, the rematriation of Indigenous land and life. And, you know, depending on where you all are at in the world, it's going to mean different things depending on which borders we are in. I'm based on the borders of Canada. Depending on where we're at in Canada, there's different situations geographically. So for example, in Halifax, on Mi'kmaq Treaty territories, we actually have a treaty in place called the Peace and Friendship Treaty. So we can start to treat these treaties just in the same way that we treat the constitutions of, let's say, like the Constitution of Canada, which is sort of a settler colonial document that has been imposed. We can start to employ treaties in that same way in our own practice, in our own research. So for me, there's a treaty in place out west at UBC. UBC is located on Musqueam territories, on the west coast, Coast Salish territories, where there are no treaties. So that land was actually stolen without consent. So when we're talking about giving back land, that's like a very real process. So in terms of what we can do as health professionals in this context is start to think about how that applies to our everyday practice with our clients, in our research, as well as in our personal lives. Thinking about, you know, reshaping what it means to think about land as property, and instead starting to think about like land as life. Like we don't own land, land owns us. Like we are humans on this land. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with these worldviews and concepts. So that's one aspect. Decolonization is the rematriation of Indigenous land and life. So what does that mean for menstrual cycles? For me, it means revitalizing ancestral worldviews and practices when it comes to menstruation. So not necessarily always going to a pill or a patch or a shot, as you all, I'm sure, are very familiar with, being able to revitalize those ancestral modalities. So for me, my ancestors are from the Punjab region of modern-day India and Pakistan. I have been uncovering Ayurveda as an ancestral healing modality, which very much complements East Asian medicines, and there's a lot of overlap there. And Ayurveda, for folks who are not familiar, is a healing modality that's based on using food and herbs as medicine, and taking a really preventative approach. It's a fusion of East African medicine based on the migration from East Africa to South Asia, as well as from Central Asia, and sort of came about thousands and thousands of years ago. And at least in the borders of Canada, like there's a massive population of South Asian diaspora, but often because of either being lost in translation or things like systematic racism, Ayurveda is not often explored in the menstrual health, women's health realm, though it is sort of becoming revitalized, as it were. So that's one way, like bringing back our ancestral worldviews, supporting our Indigenous colleagues, neighbors, clients, to be able to tune into what their ancestors know and have known for a really long time, and holding space for that, allowing people to sort of bring that to the surface to explore. Because of the impact of colonialism, some people have become very disconnected from, what their ancestors would have done in the past. And because of colonialism, in some ways, there has been like an overlay of oppression of women. So for example, I'll go into the 4 seasons shortly. So I'll leave that example for them. So that's one example, revitalizing ancestral worldviews, as well as developing and reclaiming and redefining our relationship to land. So when it comes to herbal medicine, let's say, being really mindful of what types of herbs we are drawing on, whether they are being depleted, whether they come from sustainable sources, as well as trying to find sort of ethnobotanical equivalents in the land that we live in. So, Schisandra berry, for example, is really popular, really well utilized, but often those sources are being depleted. Like we are just taking and harvesting too much. So how do we find plants that are in our land that we live in that have similar properties, rather than, continuing to colonize the land in some ways for particular reasons. So when it comes to women's health, there's lots of herbs that we use, and we want to make sure that we're getting those from good sources, ethical sources, thinking about who the farmers are that we're taking them from. Big thing that I learned from one of my mentors, Stephanie Morningstar, who's identifies as Indigenous, runs her own apothecary, is a trained herbalist out in Ontario. She shared that we actually shouldn't be wildcrafting. So thinking about how do we get herbs from farmers, how do we grow our own herbs, rather than taking them from the land, because the land, as you all can tell, is sending us some very clear signs that we need to back off a little bit as humans, take a chill pill and just calm down, give her some space to regenerate. So those are some ways that we can start to think about decolonization in our practice, particularly as it relates to menstrual health and women's health. And okay, so I'll jump into the 4 seasons of menstrual cycles, which is a framework that I learned in my own journey of decolonizing my understanding of menstrual cycles. Because growing up, the only thing I heard about was periods. And the only thing about periods I heard about was it happened and this is how to use a pad. There was absolutely no conversation either within my own family or even at school about what it means. Often we take a very reproductive centric approach to menstrual cycles, which is obviously very important for this group when we're talking about maternal health. However, I see periods and menstrual cycles as so much more than that. They're really important for bone health. Healthy ovulation allows us to absorb nutrients in a good way. And they're really, really, really important for mental, emotional, and spiritual health. So on this journey of learning about periods, I learned that the cycle is actually broken up into 4 phases, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So I'll go through them. The 4 phases correspond with the 4 seasons of the earth. So the first one is winter. So when we think about winter, at least here where I am, it's getting real cold. We're getting bundled up. We're turning inwards, starting to do some more reflection in our bodies. And winter in menstrual cycles corresponds with periods. So when we think about periods, it's the time to bleed. Our body is shedding the lining, and it's a form of detox and release. So in our menstrual blood, in that endometrial lining, the body has actually taken all the toxins that have accumulated in some of our organs, especially the water soluble ones, basically concentrated it in the period lining and allows us to detox as we shed that. So it's a pretty energy intensive time, like it uses a lot of energy to do so. And it's a time for inner reflection, rest, turning inward, all the things that we think about when we think about winter time. The second season is pre-ovulation. So lining is shed, the body's getting ready, the ovaries are getting ready to release another egg. So pre-ovulation corresponds with spring. It's when, it's a great time to put together to-do lists, to take radical action. Energy levels are a bit higher. Even sex drive could be a little bit higher. In terms of maternal health, pre-ovulation is, the perfect time for conception because there is a fertile window. There's only a certain period, as you all probably know, that one can actually conceive. Pre-ovulation is a big part of that. So when it comes to that springtime, menstrual spring, again, super high energy, good time to socialize and go out. Even when it comes to our research activities, like good time to schedule interviews, doing surveys, all of that stuff, seeing clients. And then we move into the third season, which is ovulation. Ovulation is super short. It's about a 24-hour to 48-hour window. And though we are fertile for longer than that because of the way that the cervical fluid acts in the body. So ovulation, it's a time when the body releases the egg. It's like a sunshine, things are shining, super exciting moment for the body. It's a really, really important for bone health, as I mentioned, that release of the egg. It's also like a spiritual release in some ways. It's a great time to schedule like parties, social gatherings, kids' birthday parties, hopefully they land on that ovulation, pre-ovulation time, meeting up with friends, often moms with maternal health. As we talked about, sometimes it's hard to prioritize our own health and well-being and our own social life. So ovulation, happens every few weeks for folks. It's a really good time to schedule it in. And then we get into PMS, which corresponds with menstrual autumn. And when we think about autumn, we think about the leaves sort of turning brown and things getting ready to shed and be released. People can experience irritation at this time, and it's that irritation that leads sort of to the next transformation or the next up level in one's life. So I like to think about irritation as the step before transformation is going to happen. So starting to think about positive ways that we can relate to our clients, relate to our research participants, especially as it comes to PMS. So it's a really good time to let go of limiting beliefs. So things like, I'm not a good mother, I'm not doing enough, I am spending too much time on myself, I am, unwell, or I'm unworthy. These sorts of limiting beliefs that get stuck in our body that have been passed down to us maybe intergenerationally through processes like colonialism, or in the womb while we ourselves were in the womb, or growing up as kids and teenagers. These limiting beliefs that society puts on us. PMS, menstrual autumn, perfect time to shed them, just as the trees are starting to shed their leaves. So this 4 seasons of menstrual cycles approach, as you can see, is not just a physical process, it's a mental, emotional, spiritual process that everyone who menstruates goes through. And for moms, in terms of maternal health, it's a really great way that folks can start to organize their lives to bring down that burnout, to bring down the overwhelm that often comes with parenting, so that you can be like, okay, I'm super irritated and I kind of hate everyone right now, and I'm in PMS. That makes total sense, rather than feeling like, guilty for those emotional expressions that come up, and realizing that it's something deeper in our bodies that's happening, rather than just this surface level challenge that we're dealing with day to day. Because with parenting, like the stress that comes with it is for real. I feel like a lot of the challenges that people face in their lives are due to the stress of living in a colonial system, the demands that we have on ourselves. A lot of people are in precarious housing situations, or just dealing with what it means to be a modern human these days. So I like to support my clients by sharing these 4 seasons with them, allowing them to start to express themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually through these different phases, and as well for us. So as researchers, as practitioners, as folks like doing this amazing healing work out in the world, we also experience burnout and, have maybe families ourselves. And so this is a great way for you all, for me as well, to start to organize our lives, organize our practice, and start to get into a right relationship with the land again. Because one thing about colonialism is that it gives this narrative that we need to achieve linear progress and success, if not exponential progress and success. We always need to be getting better and improving and all of this stuff, which is important. I do think that. However, there's also this response that those of us who identify as settlers, as folks who have come to these lands who are non-Indigenous, part of like the wounding that colonialism has imposed on us is this need for more, like constantly consuming, constantly needing more and more and more and more to feel satisfied, whether that's food, material possessions, money, like achievements, acknowledgement, all of this. So when we start to tame down this notion of linear growth, exponential growth, turn up cyclical living, not only do we, calm down, which is very necessary for everyone's health and well-being, especially for maternal health, but we also start to redevelop that relationship with the land, tuning into the seasons, tuning into our bodies, taking our energy from always being up here in our minds, bringing it down, tuning into all the energy centers and allowing the energy to flow, in a good way through our bodies. So that's the 4 seasons. I would love for you all to experiment with it. Let me know how it goes for you. If you don't identify as a menstruator and you don't get a period or a menstrual cycle, you can use the lunar cycle. So instead of period, you can sub in the new moon. Instead of pre-ovulation, you can sub in waxing moon. For ovulation, full moon. PMS, autumn, waning moon. So depending on where you're at in your journey, either in your gender, in your sex, as well as in your journey from, puberty to menopause, you can sort of play around with the lunar cycle or the menstrual cycle, and it's going to vary person to person. So, for example, a friend of mine who identifies with having PCOS their menstrual cycle is like, 3 months long, sometimes from one period to the next. For someone who maybe has just come out of puberty or is going into perimenopause, premenopause, it might be like 18 days from one period to the next if they didn't ovulate. So it's going to vary person to person, and it varies cycle to cycle. So it's not always that like 28 days. And I think sometimes we do need to normalize that, because people will freak out or feel like they're not normal if we continue to perpetuate this, single story about what it means to have a menstrual cycle, as well as a single story of what it means to live and exist in a society. So part of the work of decolonizing menstrual cycles is, revitalizing these ancestral ways of being, as well as understanding that everybody's body is unique, everybody's menstrual cycle is unique. So when it comes to things like conception and fertility, post-birth, it's going to just be a different story for every person. It's going to be unique, and allowing people to go into that. So I share that with you all now, and I'll go into the final topic for today, which is, okay, so we know the 4 seasons, we know decolonization. How do we start to bring abundance into our life in order to support ourselves, our clients, research participants, etc.? So we're going to do a few different things. One is I'm going to go through those 4 seasons again real quick and show how we can use the process of manifestation through that, and just stay with me now. And then I'll share that meditation with you all. So the 4 seasons recap: period is winter, pre-ovulation spring, ovulation summer, PMS is autumn. And this notion of manifestation, it draws on the principle that what we think about is what we attract into our lives. So our thoughts, our feelings, they set out a particular vibration, a particular frequency, because as we know, everything in the universe is made up of energy, vibrating at a particular frequency. So what we think about, what we feel, is what draws that to us. So for example, if somebody really, really wants to get pregnant, they can think, I'm pregnant, like I'm conceiving, I'm going to have a healthy pregnancy, and that'll help their body, their mind sort of come together, in addition to, obviously like the physical, emotional, spiritual work that they're doing as well. And whereas if you're thinking, I'm never going to get pregnant, this is going to be so hard, I'm going to have a really tough time during this pregnancy, like that will manifest. Our thoughts, our cells are listening to what our brains are saying. And I see it time and time and time again, not only when it comes to fertility and pregnancy, but just overall in life, in all aspects of life, from health to finances to relationships, to your life's purpose or spirituality, depending on how you identify. So in terms of those 4 seasons, we can actually use them for the manifestation process. So you can do it for your own selves. You can support your clients to do so. So with periods, that winter season, this is a really good time to either write down or say out loud what your intentions are. And we say those intentions through gratitude. So I am so happy and grateful that, fill in the blank, I'm going to receive a check for $10,000. You'll have to, if you haven't manifested money before, start small, start in like the 20s, move up to the hundreds, move up to the 4 figures, 5 figures, work your way up. Pregnancy, you can, manifest all sorts of things in relation to health, health and healing for your ovaries, recovery from, a particular surgery, or, very gentle move into menopause, whatever it is that you want to do. We set that intention during our periods or on the new moon. Then we go into the waxing moon or pre-ovulation. And that's when we want to take radical action. So as much as we think and visualize, none of this will happen if we just like are sitting on our couch the entire time. We want to make sure that we're taking action towards those goals and intentions as well. So great time to, as I mentioned, create those to-do lists, reach out, send those emails, whatever it is that you need to do, book those appointments in, take that movement practice class, go for a walk, meet up with a friend who's going to support you at that time. And then we get into ovulation and the full moon. This is a really good time to visualize. So literally lying down, eyes closed, using our third eye imagination center to imagine the outcome that you would like to see. A lot of folks, vision is a sense that has been privileged by this current system that we live in. But if you want to like sense the smells or feel the feels or hear the sounds, whatever it is, whichever senses you're drawn to, you can draw on those and just start to paint that picture of whatever it is that you'd like to visualize. So whether that's a healthy pregnancy for your clients, whether that's your dream house that you're going to be able to support and host your family in, whether it's like the promotion that you want to have, the new job, whatever it is during ovulation, it's like our energy is super, super, super charged at that time. We're often in a high vibe state. I don't know about you all, but like pre-ovulation, ovulation, I'm always like, life's so great. I'm in such a good mood. So we can use that to sort of propel and attract ourselves, move ourselves towards that vision. And then when we get into PMS in autumn, as I mentioned, this is the time where we want to let go of limiting beliefs. We want to clear out any trauma that's been passed down to us, either intergenerationally or that we experienced during childhood, any trapped emotions that can get stuck in various organs. For example, depression can sort of linger and vibrate in the liver and gallbladder. In the ovaries, there can be a lot of shame and shock and feelings of unworthiness. So there's various modalities that we can draw on to help us clear out that trauma, get the energy moving again, or just get it out of our bodies. Similarly, helping our clients to do so. Folks who have a lot of trapped emotions or trauma in their pelvic center, for whatever reason, they might have a harder time conceiving and a harder time postpartum or even during birth. So we want to make sure that we're supporting them to clear out some of that trauma. There's ways to do it that involves, having to talk about the experiences that might have caused that trauma. There's also ways to do it where it's totally tapping into the subconscious and you don't have to go there. For some folks, it's like, no, I'd rather not relive that experience. So feel free to get in touch with me if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that aspect. So we can use these 4 seasons to manifest abundance because of the ways that colonialism has created inequities in the world. Like now's the time of redistributing wealth. Now's the time to be able to rematriate that land and life. And so we want to make sure that we're doing that. I would love to see the amount of wealth that is concentrated, redistributed to all of the moms in the world, all of the care work that is done. So let's do that. Like we have the power to do it. I want to empower you all to be able to do it so that we can create and support the next 7 generations that we're, literally giving birth to and socially reproducing as well. So with that, the final piece that I'll wrap up with is a short meditation that maybe you all are familiar with. Maybe you aren't. And it's a process called regulating. And so again, as you all potentially know, regulating or bilateral regulation is the process of turning down our sympathetic nervous system. So turning down that fight or flight, like super high elevated cortisol. Cortisol is important, but we don't want it at like really high chronic levels all the time, which I often sometimes see in clients and friends who are moms. And we want to turn up or turn on our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest, our calm state, and learn how to do it like by our own selves, through our own body, as opposed to exogenous ways. So for example, like food, eating really sugary foods, insulin is antagonistic to cortisol. So insulin spikes can turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, but I would love to teach folks just to do it like solo by our own selves without necessarily having to take in exogenous forms of being able to do that. And in Ayurveda, there's also a similar principle called Nadi Shodham Pranayama, or alternate nostril breathing. And it's the understanding that, there's obviously energy meridians that run through our body in various directions in various ways, but that governing meridian in Ayurveda, at least the two nadis, there's one that controls that sympathetic response, one that controls the parasympathetic. So it allows us just to tune down that sympathetic, turn up the parasympathetic. And the way we do that, I'll just demo it so that you all can see, and then we'll do it together. Again, it'll take about 90 seconds. So imagine that my hands are on my thighs. So if you like, you can place your hands on your thighs and just sort of practice it with me. What we're going to do is we're basically going to channel our breath with the pedaling of our hands. So we're going to breathe in, lift one hand up, breathe out, put it down, breathe in, lift up the opposite hand, breathe out, put it down, and just continue this process of pedaling opposite hand to the rhythm of our breath. We can also do it with our feet if that feels more comfortable. If you have any pain in your wrist, you can go wrist first. So breathing up and down and out, breathing in and up, down and out. So why don't we do that together? So first I'll invite you just to get into a comfortable position in your chair, or if you're standing, just get into a comfortable position. And whenever you're ready, you can close your eyes. We'll just tune into the rhythm of our own breath today if we haven't already been paying attention. So just tuning into our breath wherever it's at today. Taking a big, deep breath in to the base of our lungs, into the center of our body. Really good, y'all. So whenever you're ready, at the pace that feels comfortable to you, wherever your natural breath is, we're just going to start to do that, pedaling our hands, lifting one up as we breathe in, putting it down as we breathe out, switching to the opposite side, breathing in and up and out, and placing it down. Then continuing on at your own pace. We'll do one more cycle together. Well done. Whenever you're ready, you can just rub your hands against your thighs or against each other. Wiggle your fingers and toes, just bringing our awareness back to the outside of our body. And you can open your eyes and come back into the room whenever you're ready. Welcome back, y'all. So I share this process of regulating that we can use in any season of the menstrual cycle, whether that's during pre-ovulation, ovulation, when our energy is like super, super high, we're like a little bit, manic maybe even, just allows us to sort of bring it back down into that window of tolerance. Similarly, if we're in PMS in autumn, our energy is super, super low or really irritated and angry, allows us to bring it back up into that window of tolerance as well. And just allows our body to get into that parasympathetic state that's necessary for recovery of all kinds. It's necessary to, get out of that stress response. And it's a good way for us to, support our clients, support our own health, pass it on to our kids so that they can learn how to regulate their own selves, their own bodies. And it's a form of decolonization, in my view, because it sort of takes down like that collective intensity, stress, anxiety that we're sort of facing in our world, and just bring ourselves into that sort of grounded state, back in good relation with the land. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll pass it on to you, Farah. Nice to see you.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I'll pass it to Emily, and then I do have a question to ask Tak. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's always wonderful to hear and to find out how much overlap there is. And so most of our group is actually allopathic and researchers, but everybody is quite open to discussion and different ideas. But personally, as a Chinese medicine doctor, hearing all of that, it's exactly what I share with my clients. There's so many themes that really overlap between what you've said. I describe that in menstrual health, but also in childbirth itself. It tends to be pathologized, and it's linear in that, like, they expect to see 1 centimeter an hour, and there's a whole series of this where really in childbirth there's ebbs and flows, and there's a cycle, and there are seasons of the actual childbirth process. So how you're talking about menstruation, I think, can be overlapped in so many different areas for those who are childbearing. I'm curious to know, and I'm going to ask a question. I think Dr. Farah Shroff has a question, and that'll give some time for everybody online to start putting your questions in the chat box as well. But I guess what I'm curious about is, for me, this resonates deeply. It makes absolute sense. But for the allopathic community and the research community, what you're talking about is exceptionally radical. And so at least that's been my experience over the past 16 years, is these concepts don't tend to be that welcomed. So I'm wondering if you're doing any research and how you found proposing that research, whether it's welcomed, if there's anything you're working on, so that anyone within our group who is watching now or watching the recording, they can reach out, because I really think that there is a bubbling movement, but we're still few and far between. And there's a lot of voices that are quite loud who this is too radical for them.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that, Emily. I did my PhD program, as I mentioned, interviewing folks primarily in medicine and nursing on some of these concepts. And I found a wide range of acceptance. So some folks like super on board, they're like already there doing some of this work. And some folks you could tell like just in their answers, were thinking like, oh, don't want to mess this up, or there's like a few keywords that they know that they would interject. And I think there is a certain amount of resistance to it just in terms of what is taught in medical schools in particular right now. However, over the last year, I think 2 years rather, I think there has been a massive, massive awakening and like a raising of people's consciousness, especially as it relates to the impact of colonialism on people's health and well-being. So I sort of take that as the entry point. So I'll go in, start talking about things like equity, diversity, and inclusion, or anti-racism, and that's usually my entry point, because that's the place where people feel very underqualified, so they need outside help. And it's a place where we can start to talk about why it's important to bring in multiple worldviews, multiple ways of thinking and understanding on an embodied level, preventative care as well as acute care and care of chronic illness. So that has been my entry point, and it's a good point because a lot of people need a lot of help right there at the current moment. And then when it comes overall, I do see that there are trends and people are starting to shift and change. For example, a colleague of mine, Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary, who's based in the US, she shared the story about how 20 years ago, she's a medical doctor as well as an Ayurvedic doctor. 20 years ago, her colleague sat her down because she was using Ayurveda in her practice with folks with neurodegenerative disorders or challenges like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. They sat her down and they had an intervention. They're like, listen, Kulreet, people think you're super weird. Like, this is not acceptable. We're really worried for your career trajectory. And now she says those same folks are coming to her being like, oh, please help us. Your clients are doing amazing. Like, what is it that you're doing? I think people are really opening their eyes to the importance of complementary medicine, understanding that actually these modalities can be quite synergistic, that it's not a matter of like out-competing one another. It's in fact a practice of bringing these modalities together and seeing what can emerge out of it. So I think those sorts of ways of bringing the conversation, saying that like this isn't a competition, let's collaborate, starting with folks who are already a little bit on board, and then sort of folks on the margins or folks who, think that it's like really out there, they'll eventually have to catch up. Like natural selection says that we will have to evolve and understand these ways of being if we want to survive as a species. Like that's just what is needed. So I think for folks who are already on board or learning about it, it's going to be easier to bring them in with us. And then folks who just are not on board or have a fixed mindset, they like the pressures of society as well as the earth will, in my view, I think they will just have to adapt. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think I agree with you. In the past couple of years, there has been an awakening, which is just glorious. If you have your PhD or any kind of research that is currently published, you're welcome to put it in the chat box so that everybody listening can have a peek at it when they're doing their own work, or if they want to share your work, so that we can continue to spread this. I think Dr. Shroff had a question, so I'll pass that on to her. If you unmute yourself, Dr. Shroff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Solomons, and thank you so much for this workshop, Tak. And I did my work on Ayurveda for my PhD thesis. That was a long time ago, and the premise of my thesis was that Ayurveda could actually help Canada. The premise of Ayurvedic medicine could shift Canadian health policy. So I've been working in this with, like many others, for a very long time. Yeah, I finished my PhD in 1996. So I'm definitely on the road of trying to bring more of an integrative way of thinking into Canadian health policy and the way that we do things here, as well as into women's health. And I wanted to just reflect collectively here, like as a South Asian woman, I can tell you that today when I go to India, and I'm a Parsi going back to my own family, there's still a lot of stigma associated with menstruation. The word in India, in English, they say, I'm sitting in my time. And in our culture, we aren't allowed to go into the temple when we're menstruating because women are considered dirty when they're menstruating. And so one of my forms of feminist activism within my community has been to talk about these taboo subjects and to talk about how, in fact, it's really the opposite. Our fertility is declining as a community, and when our women menstruate, it's actually because we're very fertile and very pure and beautiful. So I just would love you to comment on that with your South Asian woman as well, within South Asian communities, how we as feminists can move this conversation forward.
Yeah, definitely. I love that question. And for me, it's sort of like going back to the original scriptures. So if you look to the original scriptures of Sikhism, let's say, even Islam and various branches of Hinduism, as we know, Hinduism is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually like many different micro religions that kind of all got grouped together because of British colonization. But if you go back to those scriptures, I identify as a Sikh Punjabi woman, in Sikhi, it's written like menstruation is a beautiful process, a life-giving process of maternal health. So I think part of it is, again, like that revitalization of what the original messages were. And that is definitely happening. So for example, in India, at the end of 2019, there was like a massive protest. Millions and millions and millions of women and menstruators formed a human wall that was like 500 kilometers long, protesting their exclusion from religious sites based on their periods. And they did win. Folks were able to enter. However, that's still something that, is continually being challenged, particularly at the individual family level. So I feel like it is, again, from a feminist perspective, we are seeing those values being turned on their heads as more and more women get empowered with this knowledge, particularly like decolonizing their own minds and bodies, that we are seeing that shift. Even in like the diaspora, I get lots of young folks telling me similar stories and how they are, fighting back. They're talking to their parents. They're challenging these assumptions and practices. So there definitely is change afoot.
Oh, thank you. And I absolutely agree. A lot of my clients, their comments are always like, I wish I knew this before, like just being able to connect with something that's been so pushed to the side.
Yeah, I just studied archaeology in university at Simon Fraser, and I always just loved learning about periods and what women would do in different cultures and how it was always so much more supported, the women, especially like red tents, or I remember in Asia, like women weren't really they didn't have to like get out of bed. Especially after childbirth, ancient women in China sometimes didn't have to get out of bed. Their duty was just to be there with the baby and recover. And I just feel like in our modern society, like you're saying, it's just like women are so detached from their own menstruation. And I guess like one of my questions was, because I always follow the moon, and I always manifest at the new moon and release at the full moon. And I'm realizing that maybe it might be better for me to manifest during my spring of my own personal body, and my own cycle. And so I'm just kind of curious, like for those who are very much more like I am quite advanced in knowing my cycle and also the manifestation of the, you know, the waning and the of the moon. So how would you like interconnect them really? Because then you could possibly be, it could be like the full moon you're ovulating on, but that's more like releasing. But for you, it would be more manifesting. So I'm just kind of curious what you do then.
Yeah, definitely. I would say you do you. So whatever works for you, I'm definitely on board with. I like the fact that sometimes we can like double up because not people's cycles don't always correspond with the moon cycles just based on you know, light exposure and all of this. And you know, back in the day, some folks would have the opposite cycle so that they could take care of folks who were bleeding. So I'd say just go with what works for you. That's my main message, is like empowering people, because often we feel like, oh, I'm not doing the right thing, or my cycle should look like this. And what does it mean if I don't bleed on the new moon? Does that make me like, what's going on? So whatever's working for you, if it's working, like keep doing it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is just wonderful. I actually did do doula school after my undergrad because my archaeology degree like made me realize that I needed a skill that was something that like could never go out of date, and just something that they don't teach you anything in school. Like it was second, third year university when I started to understand my hormone levels and phases of my menstrual cycle. So it's unfortunate that they don't really encourage this like growing up in school. And like, do you guys like, I have like a dream of building red tents. Do you guys have any like thing that's kind of similar to that, or like might need support, or just because it's something that keeps coming up that I would like to somehow facilitate one day, but I'm just curious if you guys do anything like that, or you need support or something like that as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. So our main method of translating this knowledge has been on Instagram through I'm with Periods work. And we also published a book called Self-Care Down There with Simon and Schuster that came out last year. And it's a very like back to basics, super accessible book. There's 100 pages. Each one is an entry and it has a self-care tip. And we've been sharing that book out, and the majority of the profits go to pelvic health projects in India, Pakistan, and in Canada. So that's been our method, is sharing out the book, sharing out the Instagram, and then funneling those proceeds into organizations who are already on the ground doing this work. So if you'd like to support, that's one way to do it, is check out the Instagram page, get the book, share it out to folks, you know, get it. I like to get it in the hands of younger people. So, you know, I don't know, young folks maybe don't have Amazon accounts, so it might be hard for them to access it. You can request it at your public libraries, so that young folks who have access to the library can get it there. So that's been our main method. And then with COVID, obviously there's been like no events happening in person. So I imagine once things ease up, we will definitely be organizing some more events as well.
Yeah, and so much of it is about our community. So even just, I think, the people understanding and connecting to their menstruations, then naturally being able to create those red tents with their sisters and their menstruating friends and those around them that are already within their community in those small kind of pockets. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and to share what you've been working on. I really do think this conversation is getting more prevalent, and the topic is getting louder, and it really needs to. So
thank you all so much for having me.
We really appreciate you joining in.
Thank you so much, Tak, and we really do hope that communities can come together more soon.
Definitely. Well, take care, y'all. It was so nice meeting you, and we'll talk soon. Bye.